Killing Floor. A gritty atmospheric co-op horror shooter. Just cool guns and things to shoot at. Killing Floor 3 just released, and a lot of people are saying that it's just not the same anymore. But to see what it actually was, I want to take you through the entire history of Killing Floor. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Violence. It's 2004. Battlefield is still fun, and as such, you're browsing Planet Battlefield for 1942 mods. And while scrolling, you stumble upon a deathmatch mod where one team played zombies and the other survivors. The name? Killing Floor. This is what happened to aspiring 3D artist Alex Quick. Alex contacted the team making it and got an email in return saying that they were in fact in need of artists. He quickly started making assets, gun models, and even working on his first map. The only problem with Killing Floor at this point was that it didn't exist. The team didn't have any coders, and Alex was the only artist. Feeling like he was the only one contributing to the project, he decided to leave the project somewhere in August. But he hadn't given up on Killing Floor just yet. Alex had been following a mod called Out of Hell, being made in Unreal Tournament 2004. Alex really liked Out of Hell's grimy and morbid art style. It looked nightmarish. He didn't even really like Unreal Tournament itself, as he wasn't a fan of the sci-fi aesthetic. However, Unreal Tournament's engine could help him achieve what he wanted with Killing Floor, he thought. He continued with his artistic endeavors, with only one small issue. Killing Floor still did not exist. He was entirely on his own, and could not code. It was just models and maps, posed for screenshots, just to have something to show. Some coders did eventually show up, and progress was actually really fast. Weapon functionality, a complete switch to fighting AI zombies instead of players, and even adding ragdolls. Then one day, in April 2005, they decided to release a demo. Just one map, being the Biotics Lab, 5 enemies: the Clot, the Wretch, the Gorefast, the Stalker, and the Fleshpound. A few guns and no perks or classes. The Bloat was also in the game files, but it was just a scaled up Clot and was unused. So, as you'd expect, people loved it, actually. The mod got tons of attention and even got featured as Mod of the Month on ModDB. And this whole time, coders have been entering and leaving the project regularly, making it all the more impressive that anything ever even got done. And I want to stop here for just a moment and take a look at the art style. Everything is dirty, rusty and gross, not just bloody and gory. Even if there were no enemies, you would not want to be here. And while a game mechanically is essentially just code, and I'm very happy that KFMod got the coders that it did, it's also just as much of an art project as it is a game. And horror games should be dripping with atmosphere. Sometime later, they got 2 musicians, Dan Nasick, aka Zynthetic, and David Haslam. Zynthetic especially, at least to me personally, is the exact sound of Killing Floor. Fast, noisy, crunchy, and sometimes just as dirty sounding as Killing Floor looks. At least for now, it wasn't so much an action-packed Doom-level soundtrack, but more often like audible anxiety. Just a couple months later, in August, the full 1.0 version of Killing Floor was finally released, which we now call KFMod 1.0 to avoid confusion. The Bloat, the Scrake, and the Infected Soldier were added as new enemies, and actually all enemies got new models. Another enemy, being the Shade, is in the game files but was never actually used, though it'll make somewhat of a return later. I think there was also a scrap machine gun that stayed in the game files, but I haven't actually checked. 4 new maps were added, being the Manor, the offices, the sewers, and West London. All of which actually tie in together in the mod story mode. And this is actually the only version of any Killing Floor release to have a story mode. Kinda. The original story in the Battlefield mod concept was actually just a zombie infection story. Then later, for early KFMod ideas, there was just outright none. as it wasn't seen as necessary for a purely multiplayer PvP mod. I believe for the 1.0 release, they were actual zombies, but the lore is so fuzzy, I really have no idea. At least from 2.0 and onward, they had become the Zeds that we have today, being genetic clones. The lore is generally kind of dookie, and each addition to it feels like it was made up on the spot, and then slapped on with a piece of gum. But if there's any demand for it, I could do a video on the game's lore and how it changed over time. Just 1 year later, KFMod 2.0 already released, with updated maps, weapon models, and even Z models. The mod was generally improved upon mechanically, but as far as I know, no huge design changes happened. In 1.0 you used to buy guns from a gun locker, which has now been turned into a trader. The crawler and the siren were added, but the wretch and the infected soldier were scrapped. The soldier was actually still planned to be in the game, and was going to have a shotgun this time. And while it didn't make it into the actual game, the model and the animations are still in the game files. And the crawler's textures look a lot like the shades, so the shade was likely repurposed for that. And I also read something about a lab pound, which refers to the flesh pound using the crawler's textures. And I've been told that it's in the 2.0 and 2.5 trailers, but I just don't see it. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong thing. And you've probably noticed just how clean everything looks. It's like Horzine just sent in a bunch of people to clean up the maps and stuck all the Zeds into a shower before continuing the apocalypse. 2.5 was the final official version of KFMod and came out in July 2008. The art style was largely but not entirely reverted, and this is the first version of Killing Floor that has perks, which are basically just classes. There were a couple of unfinished maps for the also unfinished story game mode, which is separate from the story in 1.0, and more like the later objective mode. There's another unfinished Zed, being the gun pound, and we also got a bunch of other changes like Zed special attacks, money rooms that you need to unweld the door for, and just a bunch of polish. 2.51 was actually planned to be the final official update, but before that could happen, talks with Tripwire to release a retail version of Killing Floor had already started, which I'll get into in just a second. 2.51 was going to have the game's final boss, the Patriarch, which is actually voiced by Dan Nasick, and I think all future versions are as well. Even though this patch was never released officially, a team member compiled all the work that was done for this patch and released it unofficially somewhere in 2009. This patch never made it to ModDB, and is now only hosted on a very dead link. Somehow I got my greedy little gremlin fingers on either that patch or something slightly older, which I'm very happy about. There are unofficial patches with most of this content as well, being 2.52 and 2.53, with 2.52 seemingly being the most popular one. And I think this is a good time to mention that KFMod has loads of custom community maps, and future Killing Floor games do too. Maps such as Bikini Bottom for KFMod and Bikini Bottom for KF2. After KFMod 2.5, the initial plan for Alex was actually to move on to making Depth. But like I said, instead, talks with Tripwire Interactive started about making Killing Floor into a retail game. Sources are a little conflicting here. One source states that Alex was in Red Orchestra's IRC, asking about how he could port Killing Floor over to an RO mod. He then got in contact with TWI's vice president, Alan Wilson, and a port was made, and then they started development on Killing Floor as a retail game. The other source says that TWI reached out to Alex, but Alex then proceeded to do nothing until interest for the mod started dropping. I really wish I could have played the original RO port of the mod, but I'd be surprised if that still exists on any hard drive on the planet. Not too much is known about the actual development of KF1. I mean, how could it? The development only took anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Tripwire actually wanted to develop the game for a little longer, but these past few months have completely bled them dry. But the game already had exactly what it needed. Cool enemies, cool maps, cool guns, and a Mexico filter. The people at Tripwire often call themselves gun nuts, and for KF1, it really shows. With the simplicity of the game, you have Zeds on your screen most of the time, and your only way of interacting with them is your gun. This is the game, and it feels great for the most part. The sound especially, even the starter pistol, just sounds meaty. The animations are great, especially for the time. And the recoil can be decently strong too, which I think also adds to good gun feel. I don't think anyone really likes guns that just shake in place, hovering there and not actually recoiling. Okay, so the guns feel good. Great. What about the other half of the game? The things you'll use the guns on. The Zeds. Well, they're fine. By today's standards, their pathing and animations are a bit rudimentary. But for then, good. Poggers even. The only problem that I have with them is that some of them look a bit showered again, just making them less scary. Except for the siren anyway, Jesus fuck. This main screen almost definitely cost 10-year-old me some sleep. But just stop showering my Zeds, I like them stinky. The game even got objective mode, similar to the mod's unfinished story mode, which is probably my favorite thing to do in Killing Floor. Things were going fine, but there was something spooky lurking on the horizon. Not stinky Zeds, but microtransactions. Gasp. Though, to be fair, they started out looking decently in-universe, and as just cosmetics, I didn't really have an issue with them. What I have an issue with is that they started sucking really bad, eventually devolving into golden guns and bad neon CSGO skins. And I think this garbage was the beginning of the end for dark and gritty TM. And I just want to mention this quickly. I love Killing Floor 1. Just because I don't have 3 pages of intricate developer lore and glazing doesn't mean that I think skins ruined the game. KF1, in my opinion, has the best balance of non-jank mechanics and actually having a good atmosphere. I'm only pointing out bad skins right now because it really wouldn't get any better in that regard. In 2014, roughly 5 years after Killing Floor first launched, the final update for the game was released. End of the line. But we're not quite done here just yet, as not too long before that, Tripwire launched an entirely different Killing Floor game. Killing Floor Calamity. For the Ouya. Remember that? No, me neither. I didn't know what this was until I looked it up for the video. It just seems like a little failed mini console. And the game was therefore a little failed mini top-down shooter with Killing Floor assets. It looks kinda fun, but you can't really play it anymore. I also don't know how I'd feel about my camera being that far away from the thing that makes Killing Floor special. The guns. Killing Floor 2 was now on the horizon, and a little 11-minute short film was released showing how the outbreak started, which contradicts the other several explanations for how it started. And we also got some developer diaries. Tripwire really doubled and even tripled down on Killing Floor 2 being a gun shooty-shoot game. All of the shooting animations were animated at up to 200 FPS, so that even in Z time, which is just slow motion, the gun animations would look amazing. The barrel wiggle does look a little goofy and over the top, but it still looks kinda cute. They got a speed reloading person to help with mocapping all the game's reloads, and they even got all of the Zeds mocapped, and the animations flow really well. So when you see a Zed doing some crazy shit, that was this dude. Stop gooning to the stalker. The gore was greatly expanded upon with what they call the meat system, which they say is inspired by the ghoul system from Soldier of Fortune. And before the game was released, there were even soft-body brains and guts that could be pushed around and all that. The thing that I love about these developer diaries is that they seem genuinely passionate. They loved innovating and making new systems to make the game as close to perfect as they could get it. 100% effort, nothing spared. And then finally, in April of 2015, Killing Floor 2 released. Into early access. Concerned. But maybe it's okay. Maybe the game is actually already fun. And it absolutely was. Sure, it had issues, as does every game, but it is fun. So let's take a look at how it actually plays. The guns are mechanically just outright better with very few exceptions. The animations are clearly better. The guns actually shoot where you point them now, though the gun sounds do feel a bit flaccid. All in all, the guns are great again. There's nothing wrong with them, they're all really fun to use. But what about the Zeds? Well, I'll fast forward a little bit just so we can get all of the Zeds out of the way now. There are now more variations of the Clot, some being more dangerous than others. The Rider, which is a blue Clot that buffs others and wears armor. The Gore Fiend, which is a cracked Gore Fast. Another Crawler variant, Quarter Pounds, haha, which is a weaker Flesh Pound. And there are a handful of new bosses. Hans Volter, which ties into this game's horrendous lore. The King Flesh Pound, which gets no explanation. The Abomination, which is just a bloat on Trenbolone. And the Matriarch. Gorefasts and bloats now try to protect their heads with their blades, which actually makes for a pretty fun dynamic. The better animations also make for more dynamic aiming, as the heads are always moving around. And increasing the difficulty of the game now doesn't just give you more hard mobs, it actually makes the mobs move around faster with different animations. And having some extra bosses is pretty alright, even if I disagree with some of them existing, but they're even cleaner now. More gory, yes, but showered, again. Which brings me to one of the Zeds, in big quotes, that I left out. The Edars. In a game about grime, gore, and totally not zombies, bro. A robot. This entirely spits in the face of Killing Floor's original art style, is completely unfitting for the game's own branding, survival horror, and it's also just an extremely unfun enemy to fight. They can remotely stun you with their taser, don't have fun gore when you shoot them in the game with the meat system, and they don't even ragdoll funnily because they just explode. A lot of guns and maps are also just really glowy, clean, and futuristic now. The game clearly wanted to be more of an action shooter than horror of any kind. Even the soundtrack shifted from whatever Zynthetic was making to an almost purely metal soundtrack. Not to say that the more metal soundtrack isn't cool, it's incredibly cool. I'd even say that Killing Floor did it before it was cool. But it very clearly shows that Tripwire wants Killing Floor to be something different. Mechanically, and even graphically, the game is amazing. Atmosphere-wise, the game could have been set on the moon. And speaking of atmosphere, KF2's early concept art had some. The sci-fi theme was clearly still there, but not every part of the world was sci-fi. Sure, Biotics Lab is, but that is a high-tech genetic cloning facility. Paris, of course, with France not being as technologically advanced as the rest of the world, is not. It does actually look gritty. A non-neon apocalypse. It looks great, and most of all, it looks Mexico. There's a little something else hidden in the concept art though. Two, or maybe just one, potentially scrapped enemy. The Pit and the Clot Mother. The Pit never made it to the game in any kind of way, the closest thing probably being the Halloween plant crawler, but the Clot Mother is actually seen as a static part of the map in Biotics Lab and in the Black Forest, and it also wouldn't be the last that we'll see of her. Remember Killing Floor 1's cosmetics? They were now coming to Killing Floor 2, not even 1 year after early access launch. While the game was still in early access, this could have had fairly mild backlash, if not for the fact that Overkill, the developers of Payday 2, had just released their own microtransactions for loot boxes, where the skins actually change stats in the game. But Tripwire assured players that, no, all of the content added in Trading Floor at launch will be cosmetic only and not affect gameplay in any way. Which they then quickly followed up with, in the future, we may add weapons with new gameplay for sale. The guns could be upwards of 10 euros per gun. Many of these guns were outright overpowered or were seen as Swiss Army knives, making perk specialization much less of a factor. Many of these guns were made after Tripwire handed over the development of the game to Saber Interactive in 2020. And while Saber is known for making horde shooters, an extremely noticeable dip in quality was essentially immediately observed. From having amazing animations early on in the game made by people who seemed to know guns, to paying 10 euros for one gun where there was very clearly very little effort made for either knowing how guns work or any actual quality. This gun looks like something I'd see while playing AVA when I was 10, or like the M4 in CS 1.6 where you would pull the forward assist. It's actually a little funny and sad to look 10 years back where people absolutely shat on companies for making bad microtransactions. And now it's just kind of alright, and everyone just purchases the €90 always online game with DLC and MTX with a sigh. So while Killing Floor 2 is easily the most mechanically well put together game in the franchise at this point, it loses points in its art, atmosphere, and design, and had its monetization rather poorly managed. Remember how I said that KFMod 1.0 was the only Killing Floor game that had a story mode? Well, I tricked you, nerd. Killing Floor Calamity wasn't the only gimmicky KF spin-off. We also have Killing Floor Incursion. Incursion is pretty much a 4 out of 10 KF2 port to VR, with its own story mode. I would have given it a 6 out of 10 if it just had manual reloads, but the game coming out in 2017, just 1 year after the original Oculus Rift launched, almost excuses it. The story mode is decent fun, but it's mostly reused KF2 maps with some small changes. The real banger in this game is getting to fight the Clot Mother, or as it's called here, the Vile Matron. Though that is really all that I have to say about that. Which brings us to early 2025, Killing Floor 3's first beta. And oh boy, initial impressions were a mess. Generic characters that are locked to perks and weapons, and even hero shooter ultimate abilities. Dashes and slides allowing you to kite sets forever. Poor animations that don't flow well. A cash shop. Turbo Nerd pre-order editions and FOMO. The guns were, in my opinion, also boring looking and certainly boring to play, as the sound was not exactly great. The performance was also just horrendous. An art style completely separate from what Killing Floor was to begin with. It honestly doesn't even look like an apocalypse anymore. Like, it's not even its own world, it's just a video game world. Maybe it was too harsh to say that Killing Floor 2 was set on the moon. Maybe it's just set on a tall mountain somewhere compared to this. Okay, hold on. I always try to be as positive as I can be, and for one of my favorite franchises, surely it's not that bad. So let's talk positives. While there are FOMO editions and a cash shop and a battle pass, the main game is actually only €40. And in a market where it is pretty much the norm to shaft consumers at every release, that's really not that bad. Actual graphical fidelity is quite good too. It is a pretty game if you can forgive the aggressive change in art style. And while the art style is not at all faithful to the franchise, and is, in my opinion, unfitting, and is simply not at all what most of the existing community wanted, it is not ugly. They did achieve the actual thing that they were going for. It's not low quality, it's just a questionable direction. And while the performance was doo-doo butt, the beta gave the players a lot of options, including turning Lumen off, which is Unreal Engine 5's expensive lighting system. Most games simply do not let you, as if options shouldn't be optional. So for people that simply care more about performance than certain things, this is a lovely option, and doesn't lock the settings down in a way that the developer wants you to experience the game. You still can't turn TAA off though. I'd love to talk more about this beta, but soon after it ended, Tripwire actually listened to the overwhelmingly negative feedback and delayed the stream. But then they also delayed the game to make it a little spookier and a little bit less shit. That, and it kept crashing my recording software, which is why I haven't shown you anything yet. Before talking about what was changed after the delay, I just want to ask, how did this happen? Well, it's all speculation, but one theory is that Embracer Group acquiring Tripwire caused a drop in quality. This is somewhat supported by the fact that Saber is also owned by Embracer, and they had similar quality issues. That, along with the fact that Embracer regularly shuts down studios that aren't performing too well, doesn't paint a good picture. The animator for the guns in KF1 and 2 has also left Tripwire by this point, and is now working on Ground Branch. John Gibson, Tripwire's former CEO, also stepped down after voicing his opinion on abortion laws. I will not touch this topic because I value my happiness. I don't know how much John contributed to Killing Floor's development, but it is a possibility. There were also some rumors of KF3 initially being a crappy mobile game, which is in line with TWI trying to make spin-offs all the time, but this is almost entirely unsubstantiated from what I could find. Lastly, they could have just run out of money, which I wouldn't call unlikely, as the game's delay was accompanied by an announcement stating that they now had Embracer Group's full support. But anyway, what actually happened during the delay? Well, it only lasted 4 months, but TWI have developed a whole game in about that much time, so maybe a lot. The theme was obviously staying, as they wouldn't exactly remake the whole game, and TWI seems a bit stubborn on wanting another sci-fi game, so they didn't make it dark and gritty. They just made it dark, which is an improvement. Enemy animations were made less choppy, and it now actually feels like they keep moving towards you all the time. And well, it looks like that's kind of it. Many changes are promised to come post-launch, but I don't review promises. And Tripwire has shown themselves to probably be better off not adding as much stuff post-launch. The guns still feel bad and don't even shoot where you point them, which is crazy. I thought this was a solved issue already. And the visibility was terrible too. As soon as you'd shoot, the game would generate a million effects between you and the thing that you're shooting at. Muzzle flash, dust and smoke, sparks and massive blood effects, all while shaking the crap out of your screen, making aiming pretty difficult for all the wrong reasons. And that doesn't even take into account that the game barely runs, even on low with DLSS. You could tell me it's a next-gen poggers game and requires giga hardware, but on low, it just looks worse than KF2 and runs at a quarter of the speed, with a bunch of input lag. And remember, this is the fun gunplay pew-pew game. The monetization is still outrageous. The lobby and UI just scream live service money farm, as if Payday and Killing Floor are linked by fate, or maybe just by Sweden. And generally the game just feels like an amalgamation of everything that is disliked, but monetizable, from modern gaming. Bland heroes, a cash shop with premium currency that comes in increments that are barely not enough, battle passes and a premium subscription on the €40 game that I purchased. Hell, they even took what is essentially the game's mascot, took the most recognizable thing about him, changed it, and are trying to sell it back to you for €15. And I didn't even talk about how Tripwire handled the launch, consistently ignoring feedback regarding specialists and art style, then promising to have made improvements for launch, but please don't record or stream the stress test that comes a week before the game launches, please guys. I do actually like the weapon modding though. Some people are also saying that the gore is better than in KF2. I think you're out of your mind. I'm not sure how to feel about all the new Z special attacks, like the Scrake being able to hook you, and the Siren being the new EDAR. If I'm being honest, most of them just feel unfair. I really want to be more positive. Tripwire has shown effort to improve the game once, but right now, I just don't see it. Maybe they'll improve it over time, maybe it'll have a story like No Man's Sky or Cyberpunk. But for now, I see the game as a perfectly average, maybe 6 out of 10 modern video game. You may enjoy it, and if you do, by all means go and play it. All video games are about is giving you the most fun, but the problem is that 6 out of 10 doesn't cut it. For the third game in a franchise of bangers, why should I downgrade? And downgrading aside, the game is so vastly different from the previous two that it looks like it's not even made for Killing Floor players to begin with. I think that is all I actually have to say. There is, of course, more to talk about, like the Z design, the sound design, and even the UI, but I don't have the words. And I don't just want to plagiarize. Someone who does have the words is Theta Zero, whose video I'll put in the description in case you wanted to know more about the problems with KF3. The takeaway that I want you to have from this video is 1. That Killing Floor is a cool ass franchise, and you should play whichever one of the 6 games you like the most. And 2 is that you should maybe criticize things more, constructively of course. One thing I've seen a lot of people saying is if you don't like the game, then don't play it. Which is fair. An overwhelming negativity can be annoying or even depressing at some point. But it comes across as being told that you cannot criticize things, you should only be hyped, consume, never wish for more, and then get excited about the next thing. I think I can quite confidently speak for the whole Killing Floor community when I say that we don't actually dislike Killing Floor. We love Killing Floor, which is exactly why we have to criticize it so harshly. Because the things that we like and care about are the things that deserve criticism the most. Because if you never say what it is that you would actually like to see, then maybe one day you won't like what you see anymore. And Tripwire, please do actually listen to criticism. We know you can do better. And remember, you can run, but they'll find you before dawn.